Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Brian Kelly, LSU, essentially wrapping up fall camp with their scrimmage late Saturday night. And I want to sit down and do a little bit of a combination episode. Let's start with what we heard coming out of the scrimmage, of which it sounds like the defense absolutely had a day. But more importantly than that, let's take a look back at the last couple of weeks for LSU during fall camp. Talk about some guys that we think are going to be difference makers for LSU going into 2025. Now, by far, my biggest takeaway for LSU is that they are overwhelmingly happy with the new faces that they've brought into this program. And look, there are a lot of programs that use the transfer portal a lot. We always felt like what LSU was doing was a little bit different. Yeah, they were bringing in a lot of football players, but the quality of athlete that they brought in felt a little bit different from a lot of other programs across the country. And that's exactly what we've heard really starting back in spring practice and kind of continuing into fall camp is that the new faces we've brought into this program not only satisfied needs on this roster, but they're turning into some of the best football players that you have on this team. It sounds like LSU, they use the portal a lot and they hit on their portal additions, which is, look, it's one thing to look really good on paper with the transfer portal additions. You go ask Florida State last year. We thought on paper their portal additions were great. It's another thing to go hit on those guys. And it sounds like LSU, their hit rate's really damn high. The other thing I'll say is as much as we want to focus on these names that are highlighted in red, there's a lot of players that were already on this roster that are seemingly taking a step going into 2025. And it sounds like LSU is really happy with a couple of true freshmen that they have on this football team too. A lot of a lot of guys making moves for this LSU football team going into 2025. Want to kind of sum it all up before we get into it. As always, to the LSU fans, appreciate you guys. And it's going to be a really fun next couple of months. Many of the LSU fans who've been rocking with the boys for a really long time, we've broken down almost every single commitment on this LSU roster. Now we get a chance to see how it all comes together going into 2025. Appreciate y'all. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, I think we can start with what we heard coming out of the scrimmage, and that is this LSU defense has really sounded like they've dominated throughout the duration of fall camp. Now, there's two ways you can look at it. You can look at it with that glass half full approach of, hey, we think we got a really good defense going into 2025, of which I think is true. It's not only what I'm hearing out of fall camp, it's like what I'm seeing on this roster. There is legitimate talent at all three levels of this defense, and I think you got one of the best defensive coordinators in the game. The other way you could look at it is, hey, what does it mean for the offense? I'll just start with my general take is that I kind of have some blind trust for this LSU offense. We've seen them put out a lot of good offenses over the last couple of years. You got a quarterback that you can trust. You got difference makers on the outside. You have an offensive line, and we'll get into the offensive line a little bit more. The offensive line seemingly is the question of this football team. I do think the talent is there, and it might take a couple of weeks for this offensive line to come together because you have a lot of moving parts and new pieces. That's really the concern, but there's got to be, at least in my opinion, a little bit of a blind confidence that the offense ain't going to be a problem for LSU in 2025. Look, it might look a little bit different from former LSU teams. It might be a little bit more reliant on the defensive side of the football because I think they have the ability to do that. But I still think this offense is going to score points. You have too many difference makers on offense not to be able to put up points against some of the best defenses in the country. That's probably the best way I would sum it up. Now, I want to get into some names that have been really popping. Number one, the post-spring portal additions were not just hits. They sound like they were monster hits for LSU going into 2025. Let's start with Bernard Gooden on the defensive line. Brian Kelly kind of summed up how I feel about it too. LSU has a lot of really big bodies up front. They probably lacked a little bit of penetration. They probably lacked a little bit of athleticism. Bernard Gooden has come in, and when LSU added him from USF post spring, we kind of all assumed that he would be a rotational guy. It sounds like he's going to start for LSU. And if he ain't going to start, it sounds like he's going to play a lot of football for LSU in that middle of the defensive line and gives LSU a little bit of a different flavor up front. You have some legitimate pass rush ability from Bernard Gooden. You have a guy that, although is not the biggest defensive lineman, go back and watch him against Alabama. Go back and watch him against Miami last year. I mean, playing some of the better offensive lines that you see in the country. I'm not concerned about what this kid can do in the run. And even if you don't want to play him on those run stopping downs, you have other guys you can lean on. But it sounds like he's more than satisfied the kind of skill set that LSU is looking for in the middle of that defensive line, and that is some pass rush ability, that is some penetration. He is a little bit smaller, elite first step. He's got some power in his hands and has the ability to get into the backfield. You got a bunch of two gappers here. Bernard Gooden's a guy that's I'm a gap shooter, and I'm going to get behind the line of scrimmage. The other one, A.J. Halsey. You know, I was a big fan of A.J. Halsey coming from Houston. It sounds like he's the cherry on top for this LSU secondary, a guy that can do it all. And look, that's rare. LSU did not have these kind of safeties. I think there's a reason Jordan Gilbert, who started games for LSU last year, he's probably safety number 4 on this roster. That, to me, accurately highlights the upgrade in talent that LSU has seen. And A.J. Halsey is a guy that you can ask him to come into the box and fit the run. He's 220 pounds. He's also a guy that had 5 interceptions, knows how to read the quarterback's eyes and be a little bit of a ball hawk in the back end as well. If you're Blake Baker, you know you can do anything you want. You can ask A.J. Halsey to do anything you want in this defense. LSU didn't have that ability last year. You know, LSU had some straight up liabilities in the secondary at times. This secondary looks absolutely nails. And it sounds like A.J. Halsey has kind of been the cherry on top to what can be a really good secondary for LSU. Number 2, you got some year 2 defensive linemen that have me fired up. Gabe Relaford coming off the edge, Dominic McKinley on the inside. You know, Dominic McKinley, I feel like people were so quick to sell their stock on this kid because he wasn't maybe a 5-star impact as a true freshman. What's important to remind ourselves about Dominic McKinley is he was a summer guy. So he wasn't with LSU in the spring and in the winter last year. So he stepped foot on campus in the summer, didn't have that much time to acclimate to the collegiate ranks. With a full winter and a full spring, it sounds like this fall camp, Dominic McKinley has taken that step. You know, can he be a second, third team all SEC interior defensive lineman? I don't think it's all that crazy to make that claim. Then you look on the edge and say Gabe Relaford. I think a lot of people assume that Patrick Payton would come into this defense and be a starter coming off the edge. Sounds like Gabe Relaford is the guy that LSU likes a little bit more. That's massive because I don't think Patrick Payton's a bad football player. Like Patrick Payton, there's a very good chance that Pat Payton's a top 100 NFL draft pick over the next couple of months. The fact that Gabe Relaford is maybe a starter for this defense, but at the very least, a guy that you feel comfortable rotating with Patrick Payton, I think that's really big news. LSU's got some legitimate depth on the defensive line, depth that they did not have at times last year. I'll give you another one that I think took a massive jump going into year 3. That's Ashton Stamps. I mean, this cornerback room, again, you talk about depth, it's there. Mansour Delane has come in, and it sounds like he is that legit cornerback 1. It became very clear that it was going to be a battle for who's cornerback 2. You've heard good things about Jakeem Jackson at times. You've heard really good things about DJ Pickett. You hear him, PJ Woodland, starting to make some noise as well. Sounds like Ashton Stamps is the guy that's emerging as that cornerback 2. My biggest takeaway is last year, like LSU just had to trot out the healthy bodies that they had, knowing damn well that they weren't all that good. And I'm looking at the cornerback room this year and say, if you're on the field for LSU, like you must be a good football player because there's so much talent. There's so much depth in that room. And so I'm looking at Mansour Delane and Ashton Stamps and saying, hey, Blake Baker, you now have, and I'll say this, I thought Ashton Stamps was actually pretty dang good for LSU last year. Going into year 3, it sounds like there's a step that has taken place. Blake Baker finally has the guys out on the boundary that he can trust so he can run his defense the way he wants to run it. If you are an LSU fan, you're looking at this defense and saying, we feel not only that we're really complete, but we're having guys take that step and become difference makers. When you have elite level difference makers, your complete team at all three levels of the defense, that's the recipe. And it sounds like LSU has that. And they have a great defensive coordinator bring it all together. That's what I've learned from LSU. I think this defense for the first time in a minute is a unit that I think LSU can rely on to win them football games in 2025. It sounds like the bigger question marks are on the offensive side of the football. And I'll say this about the offense. Brian Kelly, look, is Brian Kelly the most charismatic coach when he gets up in front of the press conferences? No, probably not. The one thing I do appreciate about him is that he going to be pretty honest with you. And we can be frank about it. Like, as we've worked through fall camp, the concern is the offensive line, right? Brian Kelly got up there Friday afternoon and said, hey, I think this is going to be a really good offensive line for us. I don't think he'd be saying it the way he said it unless there's not some underlying confidence that this unit can come together. Now, is it all that surprising that it's taken a little bit? No. You got a lot of new faces coming in playing their first football together when you didn't really have that problem last year. I mean, you looked at LSU's offensive line in 2024 and say all of those cats had played multiple years of football together. You got the complete opposite. I think you have the talent on this roster. I think you have the talent in this room. It has to all come together. Is it all going to be together week one against Clemson? That's the question mark, because you look at Clemson and say that is an elite defensive line with multiple first-round NFL draft picks. Are we going to be ready to hold our own against that unit? That's a question. Now, if I'm an LSU fan, what I'm looking at and saying, look, I'm not just trying to say I want to lose that football game week one against Clemson. That's a really big game for LSU's ability to make the college football playoffs. I will say this, though. I'm more worried about how this offensive line comes together throughout the season. Because if I'm an LSU fan, like, I'm looking at it and saying, I don't want to just be in contention for the college football playoffs. I want to go win the college football playoffs. I care the most about how this team looks late in the season. Can this offensive line at some point put it all together? I think they can. The one thing that I do appreciate about this offensive line is that we know what our starting five is going to look like. Or at least we think we know what our starting five is going to look like. That's big. When I start getting concerned about offensive lines in fall camp, it's when there's a lot of moving pieces late in fall camp, because that tells me nobody's really gone out and won a job. You look at this and say, hey, the starting five we see on the screen is probably the starting five that we're going to see week one against Clemson, and they've known that for the last couple of weeks. It sounds like these guys have won their jobs, and that gives me some underlying confidence as well. And I think he got a great offensive line coach too in Coach Davis. It's a concern. We going to get those answers really dang quick in the next 2 weeks. I have some quiet confidence that this offensive line will come together. And if it does, like, this is an LSU, as much as we said this team might be led by the defense, if this offensive line comes together, Garrett Nussmeier quarterback and some legitimate weapons on the outside. I mean, I think you got 5 wide receivers that are going to be difference makers for LSU. We'll score points. Ain't no question about that. You have too many explosive players at the skill positions not to score points in 2025. Barry Brown going to make plays for you. Nick Anderson going to make plays for you. Aaron Anderson going to make plays for you. Chris Hilton too. Xavier Thomas. Sounds like Xavier Thomas had an awesome fall camp. We'll close it out there. It looks a little bit different. It sounds a little bit different. This team can be really good in 2025. We'll close it out. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.